Thanks for being here. If you're enjoying this, hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what you're doing right now. Let's get into it. What if I told you there's a place beneath the Vatican where heaven and hell conduct business? Where ancient wars are kept at bay by a pact older than any scripture? I worked there. I saw what happens when that pact breaks, and I saw what it cost to put it back together. The smell hit me first. It always did, every time I descended those stone steps into the sub-level. Incense, thick, cloying, centuries of it embedded into the walls, mixed with something else. Something that made the back of my throat tighten. Sulfur, maybe, or ozone, the kind of smell that appears before lightning strikes too close. My hand trembled against the iron railing as I made my way down. 73 steps. I'd counted them 100 times, and the number never changed, but the descent always felt longer than it should. The air grew heavier with each level, pressing against my chest like invisible hands. I'm Travis Holloway, 28 years old, almost finished with my seminary training. Or I was, before I accepted this position, before I learned what actually exists beneath the holiest place on earth. The Bank of Three Kingdoms. They don't tell you about it in theology class. It's not in any scripture, any historical record, any whispered rumor among the faithful. Only 7 people in the Vatican know it exists, and I became the 8th 3 months ago when Father Dominic pulled me aside after evening prayers. "Travis," he'd said, his weathered face grave in the candlelight, "I need to show you something, and once I do, you can never unknow it. Your vows won't protect you from this knowledge. Your faith might not survive it. Do you understand?" I'd nodded, young and stupid and curious. I wish I'd said no. The corridor at the bottom of the stairs stretched ahead, lit by electric bulbs that flickered and hummed with a frequency that set my teeth on edge. The walls were older than the Vatican itself, pre-Christian stone, covered in symbols I still couldn't fully decipher. Some looked like Latin. Others predated any alphabet I'd ever studied. My footsteps echoed wrong down here. The sound bounced back distorted like someone was walking behind me, matching my pace but slightly off rhythm. I'd learned to ignore it. Mostly. The door waited at the end. Massive. Bronze, I think, though it reflected light strangely, sometimes appearing gold, sometimes almost black. No handle, no keyhole. Just a small panel at chest height. I pressed my palm against it. The metal was always warm. Body temperature. Alive somehow, though I tried not to think about that too hard. The door recognized me. I still don't understand how, and began to open with a grinding sound that felt like it was coming from inside my skull rather than the hinges. The main chamber revealed itself in segments as the door swung inward. First, the cold. Despite the warm door, the temperature inside the bank dropped at least 20 degrees. My breath misted in front of me, and I pulled my cassock tighter. Second, the light. Not from any visible source. The entire space glowed with a pale luminescence that seemed to emanate from the air itself, casting no shadows. It made everything look flat, two-dimensional, wrong. Third, the portal. God help me, the portal. In the center of the circular chamber, 3 doorways stood without walls to support them. They weren't built, they simply existed, carved out of reality itself. Each one led somewhere else. The first doorway shimmered with golden light, warm and inviting, and when you looked at it too long you could hear singing. Not human singing. Something that made human voices sound like grinding metal by comparison. The second doorway was dark, but not empty. Shadows moved within it, thick and purposeful, and occasionally something that might have been a face pressed against the barrier from the other side. The temperature dropped another 5 degrees whenever you approached it. The third doorway looked gray. Just gray. No movement, no sound, no light. Purgatory doesn't advertise itself. Heaven. Hell. Purgatory. All accessible from a room beneath the Vatican. I forced myself to look away from the portals. Staring too long gave you headaches that lasted for days, and scanned the rest of the chamber. The archive shelves lined the curved walls, stretching up 30 feet to a domed ceiling covered in more of those indecipherable symbols. Each shelf contained artifacts, objects of power from all three realms held in neutral territory, available for retrieval under specific circumstances I still didn't fully understand. Weapons that could kill immortal beings, contracts written in blood and starlight, relics that predated humanity itself, and somewhere among them, locked in a vault I'd never been allowed to approach, the Colette de Miguel, the Coat of Michael, the one artifact that terrified even the Guardians. "You're early." I spun around, my heart hammering. Walter Grant stood in the doorway I'd just entered through, leaning heavily on his walking stick. He was 55, maybe 60, with gray hair that stuck up at odd angles and a face mapped with lines that suggested he'd spent decades squinting at something too bright to look at directly. His eyes were pale blue, almost colorless, and they never quite seemed to focus on what he was looking at. "Sorry," I managed. "Father Dominic wanted me to prepare the log before the evening transactions." Walter nodded slowly, limping into the chamber. His left leg dragged slightly, and the walking stick tapped against the stone with a rhythm that somehow cut through the ambient hum of the portal. He'd worked here longer than anyone. 40 years, he'd told me once, though he looked like he could have been here since the place was built. "Expecting anyone difficult tonight?" I asked, moving toward the massive desk where we kept the ledger. The ledger itself was another impossible thing. Blank pages that filled themselves with perfect script in 3 different languages whenever a transaction occurred. I'd stopped trying to understand how. "Always difficult," Walter said, settling into his usual chair near the second portal, the one leading to hell. He sat there every shift, watching that darkness like he expected something specific to emerge. "Question is whether they'll follow the rules." The rules. The pacto. The only thing keeping this place from becoming a battlefield. No violence within the bank, no theft, no weapons activated on neutral ground. All transactions must be witnessed and recorded. The human attendant has final authority. That last one still baffled me. I was just a seminarist. What authority could I possibly have over angels and demons? But I'd seen it work. 3 weeks ago, a demon, I think it was a demon, though it wore a woman's face and spoke with perfect Oxford English, had tried to remove an artifact without proper clearance. I'd said no, just no, and she'd stopped, and she'd frozen, unable to move forward despite clearly wanting to tear my throat out. The pacto protected me, I hoped. "Tell me about the code again," I said, opening the ledger to a fresh page. Walter's expression didn't change, but his knuckles whitened around the handle of his walking stick. "Why?" "I need to understand what we're protecting. You need to understand that some questions have answers you can't survive knowing." His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it in years before I'd arrived. "The code is sealed. It stays sealed. That's all that matters. But if someone tried to take it, they'd fail." Walter's pale eyes finally focused, pinning me in place. "Or they'd succeed, and we'd all learn what the end of everything looks like. Either way, not your concern." Before I could press further, the temperature plummeted. Frost spread across the floor in spiraling patterns, and the golden portal flared bright enough to make my eyes water. Someone was coming through. I grabbed the ledger, positioning myself at the desk according to protocol. Walter didn't move from his chair, but his posture shifted slightly, alert now, focused in a way that made him look younger somehow. The figure that stepped through the golden portal was tall. That's the first thing I noticed. Maybe 7 feet, maybe more. Hard to tell when reality bent slightly around them. They wore white robes that moved in a wind I couldn't feel, and their face was beautiful in a way that made me want to look away. Too symmetrical, too perfect. Human beauty filtered through something that had never been human. An angel. I'd seen 3 before this one. It never got easier. "Greetings." The angel's voice resonated in my chest, making my ribs vibrate. They didn't have a gender I could identify, or maybe they had all of them. "I come to retrieve item 773, the Spear of Longinus." I consulted the ledger without looking up. Meeting their eyes for too long made my nose bleed. "Authorization code?" The angel provided a string of syllables in a language I didn't recognize but somehow understood meant approved by the highest authority. The ledger confirmed it, new script flowing across the page in golden ink. Approved, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Shelf 9. Position 12. You know the rules. I know the pacto. Something that might have been amusement colored their tone. I helped write it. They moved toward the shelves with a grace that hurt to watch, too fluid, joints bending in ways that defied anatomy. The spear waited where it always did, a simple wooden shaft topped with a corroded iron point. It looked like something you'd find in a museum, mundane and ancient and harmless, until the angel touched it. Light erupted from the point, and suddenly I could see what it actually was, a weapon forged in the moment of divinity's greatest doubt, capable of wounding anything that could bleed. The angel handled it carefully, reverently, and I wondered what heaven needed with a weapon like that. The war, I realized, the war that everyone pretended wasn't escalating. Logged, I said as the ledger updated itself. Return by the next lunar cycle or forfeit access rights for a decade. The angel nodded, already turning back toward the golden portal, but they paused at the threshold, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't read. Human child, they said. Do you understand what you guard here? I guard the pacto. You guard the pause between breaths, the moment before the storm, and storms, child, eventually break. They stepped through the portal, and it sealed behind them with a sound like a door closing in an empty cathedral. I let out a breath I hadn't known I was holding, my hands shaking as I set down the pen I'd been gripping. They're scared, Walter said quietly. I looked at him. Angels don't get scared. Everything gets scared when it's losing. He stood slowly, using the walking stick for balance. Heaven's losing ground in the war. Hell's adapting faster, learning new tricks. And when you're desperate, you start considering options you'd previously ruled out. What options? Walter looked toward the vault where the coat waited in its sealed chamber. The kind that end everything. A sound echoed from the dark portal. Not words, but a low vibration that made my intestines cramp. Something was approaching from Hell's side. Second customer, Walter muttered, settling back into his chair. Here we go. The demon that emerged was nothing like the angel. It wore a man's body like an ill-fitting suit, the proportions slightly wrong, the movements jerky and unnatural. Its eyes were black, completely black, and when it smiled, there were too many teeth. Evening, gentlemen. Its voice sounded like gravel grinding together. I require access to the chains of adamant. I checked the ledger. Denied. No authorization. I'm sorry, but I have new authorization. The demon produced a scroll that appeared in its hand from nowhere. Signed by the Council of Seven. I unrolled it carefully. The script was red. I tried not to think about what it was written in, and the signatures at the bottom pulsed with a light that made my eyes hurt. It looked legitimate, but something felt wrong. Walter? I looked to him for guidance. He studied the scroll from across the room, not approaching. His pale eyes narrowed. The third signature, he said slowly. It's inverted. I looked closer. He was right. One of the 7 signatures was upside down, so subtly I'd almost missed it. Forgery, Walter declared. Denied. The demon's pleasant expression vanished. Its face rippled, revealing something underneath. Scales, maybe, or chitin, something that reflected the pale light with an oily sheen. You dare. The pacto dares, I interrupted, trying to keep my voice from shaking. And you know the penalty for attempting fraud. The demon stared at me for a long moment. I could feel it weighing options, considering whether the pacto would actually protect me if it decided to tear me apart right here. Then it smiled with too many teeth again. My apologies, an error in transcription. The scroll vanished. I'll return with proper authorization. It retreated back through the dark portal and the temperature slowly normalized. I sat down hard in my chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. "That was close," I whispered. "That was a test," Walter corrected. "They're probing, seeing how well we enforce the rules, checking for weaknesses." "Why now?" Walter was quiet for a long moment, staring at the dark portal with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. Something like grief. "Because the war's reaching a tipping point. And when this war ends, Travis, it won't be with a peace treaty. It'll be with one side extinct." He turned to look at me. "And desperate people, desperate beings, they do desperate things. They break sacred oaths. They violate ancient pacts. They use weapons that should never be touched." "The coat." He nodded slowly. "If heaven gets it, they win but lose everything they are. If hell gets it, same outcome. If it's destroyed, the backlash might collapse all three realms." His walking stick tapped against the floor. "So we guard it. We maintain the pacto. We hold the line." "And if the line breaks?" Walter didn't answer. He just looked at me with those pale eyes, and I saw something in them I'd never noticed before, something ancient, something that had seen the line break before. The rest of the shift passed quietly. 2 more transactions, both routine. A soul contract retrieval from purgatory. An exchange of information between an angel and a demon who refused to acknowledge each other's existence beyond what was strictly necessary for the trade. As I locked the ledger at shift's end, Walter spoke again. "Get some rest tonight, Travis, real rest. Sleep while you can." "Why?" "Because something's coming. I can feel it in the way the portals hum, the way the air tastes wrong." He stood, leaning heavily on his stick. "And when it arrives, sleep will be a luxury we can't afford." I watched him limp toward the exit. This mysterious man who'd worked here for 40 years, who knew things he refused to share, who watched the portal to hell like he was waiting for someone specific. "Walter," I called after him. "Were you always just a keeper?" He paused in the doorway, his back to me. "No one's ever just anything, Travis. We're all refugees from something. Some of us just traveled farther to escape it." Then he was gone, and I was alone with the portals and the archives and the weight of secrets I didn't fully understand. I climbed the 73 steps back to the world above, where morning prayers would begin in a few hours, where the faithful would gather without knowing what slept beneath their feet. The smell of incense followed me all the way up, and underneath it, just barely detectable, the scent of something burning. Something that smelled like the moment before everything changes forever. The nightmares started that same night. I'd collapse into my narrow bed in the dormitory, exhausted from the shift, and the moment sleep took me, I'd be back in the bank. But wrong. The portals bleeding into each other, golden light mixing with shadow, the gray of purgatory spreading like infection across the chamber floor. And Walter, always Walter in these dreams, standing at the center with his walking stick raised like a sword, facing something I couldn't see but could feel pressing against the edges of my vision. I'd wake up gasping, sheets soaked with sweat that smelled faintly of sulfur. It happened 3 nights in a row. On the 4th night, I stopped trying to sleep. The changes in the bank were subtle at first, small violations of pattern that most people wouldn't notice. But I'd been watching, documenting, learning the rhythm of the place. I noticed. The portals hummed at a different frequency. Not much, maybe half a tone lower, but consistent. The golden one flickered occasionally, a strobe effect that lasted barely a second but left after images burned into my retinas. Traffic increased. We went from 3 or 4 transactions per shift to 8, then 12, then 15. Angels and demons arriving at odd hours, requesting access to artifacts that hadn't been touched in decades. Weapons mostly. Binding spells. Items designed to cage or destroy immortal beings. The ledger filled faster than ever before, its pages turning themselves, struggling to keep up with the documentation. And the guardians, the bound angels and demons who existed solely to enforce the pacto, they started positioning themselves differently. No longer scattered throughout the chamber, they formed a loose perimeter around the vault where the coat waited. They know something's coming. I told Walter during a rare quiet moment. It was 3 in the morning, and we'd just processed our 9th transaction of the shift. My hand ached from gripping the pen. Walter sat in his usual spot, but he wasn't watching the dark portal anymore. His pale eyes tracked each guardian, following their movements with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "They've always known," he said quietly. "They were created knowing, pulled from their realms and bound here with full awareness of what their purpose would eventually require, which is to die protecting something that shouldn't exist." I set down the pen, flexing my cramped fingers. "The coat." "The coat," he confirmed. "Do you know why it's called that? The coat of Michael?" I shook my head. We'd danced around this topic for weeks, but Walter had never offered details. He was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the handle of his walking stick. The rhythm was precise, almost musical, a pattern I'd heard somewhere before but couldn't place. "There was a war," he finally said, "long before this bank existed, before the Pacto, when the realms were still young and hadn't learned the cost of absolute victory." His voice took on a distant quality, like he was reciting something memorized long ago. Heaven and hell tore at each other without restraint, and humanity, still new, still fragile, became the battlefield. I'd heard versions of this story in seminary, the war in heaven, the fall, but something in Walter's telling felt different, more personal. The Archangel Michael led heaven's forces, greatest warrior ever created, they said, perfect and terrible and absolutely certain of his righteousness. Walter's grip tightened on the stick. But righteousness doesn't win wars. Sacrifice does. What did he sacrifice? Everything. The word came out harsh. There was a weapon, forged in the moment before creation, a coat of celestial armor that granted absolute protection. Physical, spiritual, metaphysical, nothing could penetrate it. Whoever wore it became untouchable, invincible. "That's what's in the vault," Walter nodded, "but it came with a price. The coat doesn't just protect you from external forces. It separates you from everything. Heaven, hell, purgatory. All 3 realms lose their claim on you. You become something outside their jurisdiction, neither saved nor condemned, just removed." I tried to process that. So Michael put it on, knowing exactly what it would cost him, wore it into the final battle, ended the war. Walter's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. And when he removed it, he could never return home. Heaven's gates closed to him. Hell wouldn't take him. Purgatory had no purpose for him. "Where did he go?" Walter didn't answer. He just stared at his walking stick, and something in his expression made my chest tighten. Before I could press further, the temperature dropped. Not gradually, instantly. One moment normal, the next my breath crystallized in the air. Frost spread across every surface, climbing the walls, covering the ledger, crackling across the portal frames. All 3 portals activated simultaneously. I'd never seen that before, never even heard of it happening. The golden light blazed, the darkness roiled, and the gray emptiness of purgatory suddenly filled with shapes that pressed against the barrier like prisoners against cell bars. "Walter, stay behind the desk." His voice had changed, harder. The casual roughness stripped away, revealing something underneath that made him sound younger. "No matter what happens, Travis, you maintain the ledger. You enforce the Pacto. That's your only job." "What's happening?" "A delegation." 3 figures emerged simultaneously from the 3 portals. The angel came first, and this one was different from any I'd seen before. No beautiful human features, no white robes. This was what angels actually looked like when they stopped pretending. Wings of geometric impossibility, eyes that existed in more dimensions than I could perceive, a form that my brain kept trying to interpret as human-shaped but failing. Looking directly at it made my nose bleed. The demon followed, and it was worse. Not because it was monstrous, it wasn't. It looked almost human. A middle-aged man in an expensive suit, Graying hair, kind eyes, gentle smile. But the wrongness radiated from it like heat from asphalt. Every instinct I had screamed at me to run. The figure from purgatory was barely visible. A shape of gray ash and fading memories, human once but worn down to nearly nothing. It didn't speak. It barely seemed present. All three positioned themselves equidistant from each other, forming a triangle with the vault at its center. The guardians tensed. I felt the atmosphere thicken, pressure building like before a thunderstorm. "This violates protocol," I managed, my voice cracking. "Joint delegations require 48 hours advance notice." "We are beyond protocol." The angel's voice came from everywhere at once, vibrating through my bones. "We come to negotiate new terms." "The pacto allows no renegotiation," Walter said. Still seated, but his posture changed. Alert, coiled. "You agreed to eternal terms." "Eternal is a long time." The demon's gentle smile never wavered. "Circumstances change. The war has evolved beyond the parameters the pacto was designed to contain." "Then end the war," I said before I could stop myself. The demon actually laughed, a warm, friendly sound that made my skin crawl. "End it? Dear boy, we can't end it. We can only win it. And winning requires resources we've kept locked away for far too long." My eyes went to the vault. "No," Walter said flatly. "You don't have authority to refuse." The angel's multi-dimensional form shifted, and I caught a glimpse of something that might have been a face. The human attendant administers. He doesn't decide access to artifacts that predate human existence. The pacto says, "The pacto," the demon interrupted smoothly, "was written under different circumstances, when balance mattered more than victory, but balance has become a luxury neither side can afford." Walter stood slowly, using the walking stick for support. His limp seemed more pronounced than usual. "You want the coat," he said. "We want the option of the coat." The angel's voice softened, became almost pleading. "Consider the alternative. This war continues unchecked, escalating until reality itself fractures. Humanity burns in the crossfire. Entire realms collapse. But if one side gains decisive advantage, then one side wins and becomes so corrupted by what they had to do to win that it doesn't matter who lost." Walter's pale eyes swept across all three delegates. "The coat doesn't grant victory. It grants removal. Whoever uses it loses everything. Heaven, hell, purgatory, all of it becomes inaccessible. You'd win your war and lose your existence. A sacrifice some are willing to make," the demon said quietly. "Then let them make it without the coat. Fight your war with the weapons you have. Leave the bank out of it." The pressure in the room intensified. The guardians moved closer, their forms becoming more defined, solid, ready. "We're not asking permission," the angel said, and the pleading tone vanished. "We're informing you of inevitability. The coat will be used. The only question is whether it's used under controlled circumstances or claimed by force. If you try to take it by force," Walter said, his voice still calm, "you break the pacto. Every guardian in this chamber becomes unbound. They'll tear you apart before you reach the vault. Guardians can be replaced. Not fast enough." The standoff held for a moment that stretched too long, reality bending around the weight of immortal wills pressing against each other. Then the demon smiled again. "We'll return to our respective realms and consider your position. But understand, Keeper, the war is ending soon, with or without the bank's cooperation." All three figures retreated to their portals simultaneously, vanishing in perfect synchronization. The temperature normalized. The frost melted, leaving puddles that steamed in the suddenly warm air. I realized I'd been holding my breath and let it out in a shaky gasp. "They're going to attack," I whispered. "Yes." Walter lowered himself back into his chair, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked old. Genuinely old, worn down by decades of weight I couldn't see. "Soon, before we can prepare. Before we can call for help, not that anyone would come." "What do we do?" "We guard." He tapped his walking stick against the floor. that same rhythmic pattern. We maintain the pacto for as long as possible, and we pray that when it breaks, there's enough left to rebuild. The rest of the shift passed in tense silence. No more visitors. Just me, Walter, and the Guardians, all of us waiting for something we knew was inevitable. As dawn approached and I prepared to close the ledger, I noticed something strange. A new entry had appeared, written in script I didn't recognize. Not golden like heaven's records, not red like hell's, not gray like purgatory's. This was silver, luminous, and it seemed to shift as I read it. Walter, I know. He'd moved to stand beside me close enough that I could smell something on him. Not incense or sulfur. Something like ozone and distant thunder. It's a warning. Someone on the inside trying to tell us how much time we have left. I squinted at the script, trying to decipher it. The symbols rearranged themselves, forming words in English. 3 days. Midnight. Heaven moves first. Forgive them. Who wrote this? I asked. Walter's hand rested on my shoulder and I felt something through his touch. A tremor. Not weakness. Restrained power, like touching a live wire that was somehow grounded. Someone who still remembers what they're fighting for, he said quietly, and what they're willing to lose to protect it. Over the next 3 days, I watched the bank transform. The Guardians stopped pretending to be anything other than what they were. The bound angels revealed their true forms, geometric horrors of light and conviction. The bound demons shed their pleasant disguises, becoming writhing masses of purpose and hunger, all of them oriented toward the vault, creating a living barrier of celestial and infernal energy. Traffic stopped entirely. No angels, no demons, no souls from purgatory seeking resolution. The portals remained active but empty, humming with tension like drawn bowstrings. Walter rarely left the chamber anymore. I'd arrive for my shift to find him already there, sitting in his chair, watching, waiting. Sometimes I'd catch him talking to himself in languages I didn't recognize, ancient tongues that made my ears hurt. On the 3rd day, I brought him food from the commissary. He needed to eat, I reasoned. He was still human despite everything strange about him. He accepted the bread and cheese with a small smile. Thank you, Travis, you're a good kid. I'm 28. Still a kid from where I'm standing. He took a bite of bread, chewed thoughtfully. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why did you accept this position? When Father Dominic offered it to you, when he told you there was no going back, why say yes? I'd asked myself that question 100 times over the past 3 months. I wanted to understand, I said finally. Seminary taught me what to believe, but not why. Not really. I thought, if I could see the machinery behind faith, the actual mechanics of heaven and hell, maybe it would make sense. Does it? No. The word came out more bitter than I intended. It's worse. Before I could believe in divine justice, cosmic balance, purpose. Now I know it's just war. Endless, pointless war. And humans are just territory to fight over. Walter nodded slowly. That's the truth that breaks most people. The ones who work here don't last long once they understand what they're really guarding. Not the artifacts, not the pacto. He gestured to the chamber around us. We're guarding the illusion that any of this matters, that there's meaning beyond survival. Do you believe that? That it's all meaningless? He was quiet for a long time, staring at the vault. I believe, he said finally, that meaning is something we create, not something we're given. Michael, the real Michael, not the legend. He understood that. When he put on the coat, he wasn't following orders or fulfilling destiny. He was choosing, making meaning through sacrifice. Where is he now? I asked. If he survived using the coat, where did he go? Walter's pale eyes met mine and something in them made my breath catch. Closer than you think. Before I could ask what he meant, all 3 portals flared simultaneously. But this time, they didn't just activate, they exploded. Golden light erupted from heaven's gate like a solar flare, so bright it burned after images into my vision. I threw my arm up to shield my eyes, staggering backward. Through the blazing illumination, shapes emerged. Angels. Dozens of them. Not delegates or messengers. Warriors. Their true forms on full display. Impossible geometries of wings and eyes and burning conviction. Each one wielded weapons that looked like they were carved from frozen starlight. They poured through the portal in perfect formation, and the moment their feet touched the bank's floor, the pacto shattered. I felt it break, like a string inside my chest snapping, releasing tension I hadn't known I was carrying. The rules that held this place together, the ancient agreement that kept heaven and hell from tearing each other apart in neutral territory, gone. The guardians reacted instantly. The bound angels turned on their former kin, wings spreading to block the vault. The bound demons surged forward, their forms expanding, becoming more themselves than they'd been allowed to be in centuries. And the battle began. I can't describe it properly. Human language doesn't have words for what happened in that chamber. Angels fighting angels, light against light, each strike resonating through dimensions I couldn't perceive. Reality cracked around them, fissures appearing in the air itself. A guardian fell, then another. The attackers were fresh, purposeful, willing to die to reach the vault. The guardians were old, worn down by centuries of half-existence, fighting for a pacto that no longer existed. "Walter," I screamed over the din. "What do we do?" He wasn't in his chair. I spun around, searching for him through the chaos. Guardians fought and fell. The vault's door groaned under celestial assault. The ledger burst into flames on the desk before me. Then I saw him. Walter stood between the attackers and the vault, walking stick raised. But something was different. The way he held it. The way he stood, weight balanced despite his limp. An angel dove toward him, blade of starlight raised to strike. Walter moved, not like a crippled old man, like water, like wind. The walking stick blurred through the air, meeting the angel's blade with a sound like reality breaking. The angel's weapon shattered. The angel itself recoiled, stunned. "Impossible," one of the attackers breathed, its multi-dimensional voice heavy with shock. "You fell. You were unmade." Walter smiled. It was the saddest expression I'd ever seen. "I was removed," he corrected. "There's a difference." He planted the walking stick against the floor, and it began to change. The wood grain peeled away, revealing metal underneath. Silver, brilliant and pure, etched with symbols that hurt to look at. The stick lengthened, straightened, transformed into a sword, and Walter himself changed. His gray hair darkened, his lined face smoothed, his posture straightened, the limp vanishing like it had never existed. His pale eyes blazed with light that matched the golden portal, and behind him, wings. 6 of them, geometric and impossible and beautiful in a way that made me weep without knowing why. "Hello, brothers," he said, his voice resonating with power that made the chamber shake. "Did you miss me?" The attacking angels froze. "Michael," one whispered, "you can't be here. You gave up your place. The coat removed you from heaven, from hell, from purgatory." Michael's wings spread, filling the chamber with light that somehow didn't blind. "But not from here. This is neutral ground, and I've been its keeper for 40 years, waiting for the day someone would be foolish enough to break the pacto." He looked back at me, and despite the wings and the sword and the divine radiance, I still saw Walter in his eyes. My friend. The tired old man who'd taught me how to read the ledger and warned me about staring at the portals too long. "Travis," he said gently, "get behind the desk. This is going to get worse before it gets better." One of the attacking angels, the leader, I think, stepped forward. "Michael, brother, we're trying to end the war. Can't you see? With the coat, we can finally achieve decisive victory. Peace. Peace built on the coat isn't peace." Michael's grip tightened on the sword. "It's just a different kind of death. I know, I wore it, I paid the price, and I won't let anyone else make that mistake." "Then you'll die protecting it." Michael smiled again, and this time there was no sadness in it, just grim determination. "Brother," he said quietly, "I've been dead for 1,000 years. You're going to have to do better than that." The leader raised its blade. "And Heaven's army attacked. I've seen war footage, documentaries about conflicts that shaped history, grainy film of soldiers charging across battlefields, explosions, chaos. My grandfather fought in Vietnam, came back with stories he'd only tell when he thought I wasn't listening. Stories about fire and screaming and the way reality breaks down when violence becomes absolute. This was nothing like that. This was creation unmaking itself. The air tasted like lightning and ashes. Every breath burned going down, like inhaling the exhaust from reality's engine. My ears rang with frequencies that shouldn't exist. Sounds below hearing and above it simultaneously. Vibrations that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. Michael met the first wave alone, his sword moving through patterns that seemed to exist before he made them, as if reality was catching up to movements he'd already completed. Each strike severed not just celestial flesh, but the very concept of the angel he fought. They didn't die. They ceased to have ever been. I watched a guardian, one who'd introduced himself to me as Ezekiel during my first week, who'd told me about the vineyards of Galilee in a voice like distant bells, throw himself between Michael and 3 attackers. His form expanded, wings spreading to impossible dimensions, light pouring from every surface until he became a living shield. The attackers' blades pierced him through. Ezekiel didn't scream. Angels don't scream. But the sound that came from him as his essence unraveled was worse than any scream I'd ever heard. It was the sound of purpose ending, of existence recognizing its own termination. He bought Michael 4 seconds. 4 seconds for Michael to reposition, to strike down 2 of the attackers before they could press their advantage. 4 seconds purchased with millennia of faithful service. The remaining guardians rallied around Michael, their worn forms burning with renewed purpose. A bound demon, something that had once terrorized nations before being chained to the bank, surged forward with a roar that shook dust from the ancient ceiling. I'd never learned its name. It had never offered one. But I'd seen it watching me during quiet shifts, and sometimes I'd caught what might have been curiosity in its eyes. Now those eyes blazed with something like joy as it crashed into the advancing line. It took 3 angels with it when it fell. The temperature in the chamber fluctuated wildly. One moment frost coated every surface, my breath crystallizing into ice crystals that hung suspended in air thick with ozone. The next, heat washed over me in waves that made my skin feel like it was shrinking, drawing tight across my bones. The portals themselves were destabilizing. The golden gateway flickered, its edges bleeding into the surrounding stone. The dark portal roiled with shapes that pressed against its boundaries, drawn by the violence, hungry to participate. And through it all, angels kept coming. Not dozens, scores of them. Heaven had committed to this assault with everything it had. This wasn't a raid, it was an invasion. A final, desperate gamble to claim the one weapon that could end their war. Those seconds mattered. The vault door groaned under assault from angels who'd bypassed the front line, their starlight blades carved into metal that had withstood millennia, leaving glowing scars that smoked and hissed. Each strike sent vibrations through the floor that I felt in my bones. I crouched behind the desk, watching through gaps in the destroyed furniture. The ledger was ash now, its pages scattered across the chamber, some still burning with that strange fire that consumed knowledge rather than paper. My hands were empty, shaking. Without the ledger, I had no authority here, no protection, no purpose, just a human caught in a war between beings that could unmake me with a thought. A severed wing crashed to the floor 3 feet from where I hid. It twitched once, twice, then dissolved into geometric patterns of fading light. Michael knew my predicament. Even in the chaos, even fighting 3 angels simultaneously, he tracked my position with those pale eyes that had watched over me for months, disguised as concern for a clumsy assistant. "Travis!" His voice cut through the din, still carrying that rough edge I associated with Walter. The sound of it steadied something in me. "The vault code, you know it." I did. Father Dominic had made me memorize it my first day, made me recite it backwards and forwards until the sequence appeared in my dreams. 37 symbols in a language that predated human writing, each one precisely placed, any error resulting in permanent lockdown. What do you want me to do? Open it. That made no sense. Opening the vault would give them exactly what they wanted, the coat, the weapon that could end everything. I'd spent 3 months learning why that vault stayed sealed, why some artifacts were too dangerous to risk, too terrible to use even in the direst circumstances. An angel broke through the guardian line, diving straight for me. Its blade raised, eyes blazing with holy purpose and something else. Desperation, maybe. Fear of failure. This close, I could see the cracks in its perfect form, the wear from centuries of war showing through the divine radiance. Michael was there first. His sword took the angel through what might have been its torso, and the celestial being flickered out of existence mid-strike. But the effort cost him. 2 more attackers pressed their advantage, forcing him back toward the vault, away from me. Blood ran down his face from a cut across his temple. Red blood, human blood. Whatever transformation had revealed his wings and sword hadn't changed that fundamental aspect. He still bled like I did. "Travis, trust me." Trust. That word carried weight after 3 months of shifts together, of late-night conversations about faith and doubt, about the weight of knowledge and the cost of neutrality, of Walter, Michael, treating me like a person rather than a tool or a student or a convenient pair of human hands to do work angels and demons couldn't. He'd shared his lunch with me when I forgot mine, taught me which artifacts hummed with danger and which only appeared threatening, warned me about staring too long at the portals, about the headaches that followed, about the dreams that crept in if you let the bank's strangeness seep too deep into your mind. He'd been kind. So I ran for the vault. The chamber had become a maze of combat. Angels fought in 3 dimensions I could barely track, their movements folding through space in ways that hurt to watch. I ducked under a sweeping wing that left after-images burned into my vision, rolled past a guardian whose form was dissolving into component shadows, sprinted through a gap between fighting angels that closed immediately after I passed with a sound like reality, sutured shut. My lungs burned. The air was wrong down here now, contaminated with whatever essence leaked from wounded celestial beings. Each breath tasted metallic, sharp like licking a battery. The vault door loomed ahead, scarred but intact. The control panel glowed with symbols I'd studied until they appeared in my dreams, each one representing concepts human language couldn't properly express. Recursion, balance, sacrifice, inevitability. My fingers found the sequence through muscle memory. First symbol, a spiral representing recursion, the snake eating its tail, the eternal return. My finger trembled as I pressed it, the metal warm under my touch like living skin. Second, 3 intersecting lines for balance, the meeting point of heaven, hell, and earth. Third, an explosion behind me, ocean, not sound, sensation. Reality rippling outward from a point of impact, the shockwave passing through my body, making my internal organs shift against each other in ways they weren't designed to. Heat washed over my back, and I smelled burning feathers, scorched metal, and underneath it all, something like cinnamon and myrrh. Keep going. 17. 18. The symbols flowed under my touch, each one clicking into place with a sound that resonated in my bones. The vault recognized me, remembered me from months of faithful service, from all those times I'd stood guard while Walter, had disappeared inside to check on the coat, to make sure it remained dormant, to verify that the one artifact capable of ending everything stayed safely locked away. 23. 24. Stop him! The leader's voice, desperate now. I'd heard that angel speak before, during the delegation 3 days ago. Then the voice had been controlled, certain, righteous. Now it carried the edge of panic. If he opens it, if they get the coat. Footsteps behind me. Close, too close. I didn't dare look back, didn't dare break my concentration. One wrong symbol and the vault would seal permanently, trapping the coat forever, but also ensuring Michael's sacrifice meant nothing. 35. 36. A hand grabbed my shoulder, celestial strength ready to tear me away from the panel, to stop me from completing the sequence. Michael's sword burst through the angel's chest from behind, the blade's tip stopping inches from my face. I felt the heat radiating from the metal, smelled the ozone scent of divine weaponry, saw my own terrified reflection in the polished silver surface. The angel gasped. A sound like wind through a graveyard, through abandoned churches, through all the empty places where faith used to live, and vanished. "Finish it," Michael said, his voice strained. His blood ran down his face from a cut across his forehead, dripped onto my shoulder. Not golden ichor, red. Human blood. "Please, Travis. Trust me one more time." 37. The vault door opened with a hiss of air that had been sealed away for centuries. The smell that emerged was indescribable. Not decay, stasis. The scent of time stopped, of potential frozen, of power held in check so long it had become part of the chamber's fundamental structure. Inside, the coat waited. I'd imagined it would be ornate, jeweled, maybe, or glowing with divine radiance. Something befitting the greatest weapon ever created. The artifact that had ended the First War, the garment that had cost an archangel everything he was. It was none of those things. Just a coat, brown leather, worn at the edges, simple in design, the kind of thing a traveler might wear on a long journey through uncertain lands. It hung on a simple iron hook, and the only remarkable thing about it was how unremarkable it seemed, until you felt what radiated from it. Absence, not emptiness, absence. The space where connection used to be. Looking at it made me aware of every bond I had. My half-formed faith, shaky after months in the bank but still present, still reaching for something to believe in. My memories of family, my mother's voice calling me to dinner, my father's rough hands teaching me to tie a tie, my sister's laugh that always sounded like bells. My connection to humanity itself, to the species I belonged to the web of relationships and meanings that made existence bearable. And the coat promised to sever all of it, cleanly, permanently, completely, not as punishment, as function, as design, as the inevitable cost of absolute protection. Michael moved past me, his wings folding to fit through the vault door. 6 wings, each one covered in eyes that wept silver tears, each feather inscribed with names I couldn't read. His hand reached for the coat, hesitated. The chamber behind us had grown quiet. Angels hovered at a distance, weapons lowered, watching. Even in their desperation, even in their need to claim the coat for their cause, they recognized this moment. They understood what Michael was about to do. "I swore I'd never wear it again," he said quietly, more to himself than me. His fingers brushed the leather, and the coat rippled like water disturbed by a stone. "Swore I'd guard it so no one else would have to make this choice. 40 years, Travis. 40 years I've watched over it. Watched angels and demons pass through, conducting their business, maintaining their war. And every day I'd come in here and look at it and remember what it cost me. Then don't." I grabbed his arm without thinking, human fingers on celestial flesh, and felt the power thrumming beneath his skin like a current. There has to be another way. We can, I don't know, destroy it or hide it somewhere they'll never find it, or... He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw 1,000 years of exile. A millennium spent neither in heaven's light nor hell's darkness nor purgatory's waiting. Just here, in this chamber, in this city, in this narrow slice of existence between all the places he could never go again. I saw loneliness that would have driven me insane in a month, and I saw acceptance. There isn't, Travis. If they get the coat, they'll use it thinking it's a weapon, a tool for victory. But it's not. It's a curse. A beautiful, terrible curse that grants exactly what you ask for and destroys everything you didn't know you needed. His wings trembled, shedding light like tears. Whoever wears it wins the battle and loses the war, becomes something neither alive nor dead, neither saved nor condemned, Neither angel nor human nor demon. Just separate. Forever. So you'll do it instead. Sacrifice yourself again. I sacrificed myself 1,000 years ago. This is just finishing what I started. Behind us, the leader of the attacking force spoke. The angel's voice was hollow now, drained of certainty. Michael, brother, we didn't come here to force you into this. We came for victory, for an end to the war. We never meant... I know what you meant, I know what you wanted. Victory. Peace. An end to the endless, grinding misery of conflict without resolution. Michael's hand closed around the coat, lifted it from its hook. But this isn't the answer, it never was. It's just the easiest terrible choice when all the good choices have been exhausted. He pulled the coat from its hook. The moment his fingers touched the leather, every fighting angel in the chamber froze. The temperature plummeted so fast that moisture in the air crystallized. Tiny ice crystals forming and falling like snow inside the chamber. Reality itself seemed to hold its breath. The constant hum of the portals dropping to silence. The ambient energy that always filled the bank suddenly gone. In that silence, I heard my own heartbeat. Thunderous. Mortal. Alive. Michael lifted the coat, studying it with an expression I couldn't read. Regret? Relief? Both? Neither? Something beyond what human emotions could capture. Brothers, he called out, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber, resonating in frequencies that made my chest vibrate. Sisters, I know why you're here. I know what you're fighting for. Victory. Peace. An end to the endless war that's consumed you for longer than humans have had language to describe time. He held up the coat, leather catching the light from the portals, looking ancient and new simultaneously. But this isn't the answer. It never was. It's just the quickest path to a different kind of suffering. The leader of the attacking force stepped forward, weapon lowered but not sheathed, face showing something that might have been anguish if angels felt such things. Michael, brother. You know what's at stake. Hell is winning. Every day we lose ground, lose purpose, lose the war we were created to fight. Our very existence is under threat. The coat could what? Make you invincible? Yes. Make you untouchable? Absolutely. Grant you victory over hell in a single stroke? Without question. Michael's grip tightened on the coat, and I saw his knuckles whiten, saw the tendons stand out on his hands. It could also make you alone. Forever. Cut off from the very heaven you're trying to save, unable to return home even in victory, unable to rest even in peace, unable to die even when the weight of eternal isolation becomes unbearable. His voice cracked on that last word. I wore this once. I ended a war. I saved countless lives, human and celestial. I did what needed to be done. His pale eyes swept across the assembled angels, and I saw recognition flash across some of their faces. They remembered him, remembered the archangel he'd been before the coat. And I've spent 1,000 years paying the price, every moment, every breath, knowing I can never go home, never be what I was, never find peace or rest or resolution, just existing, maintaining, guarding. Then why wear it again? The leader's voice broke. Why condemn yourself twice? Michael smiled, that sad smile I'd seen so many times when he was just Walter, when he'd sipped bad coffee in the chamber at 3 a.m. and told me stories about the world before the church, before the bank, before the war between heaven and hell had calcified into eternal stalemate. Because you're my family, and family protects family even from themselves, especially from themselves. He put on the coat. The effect was immediate and absolute and more terrible than anything I'd witnessed in 3 months of working in a place where reality bent. Light erupted from Michael's form, but not the golden radiance of angels or the silver glow of his sword. This was different. White light, pure white, the white of absolute zero and the white of stars dying and the white of every connection severing simultaneously. Cold light that didn't illuminate so much as define absence, marking the space where something used to be connected and no longer was. The light spread outward in a sphere, expanding at walking pace but inexorable, unstoppable. Where it touched angels, they changed. Not physically, spiritually. The compulsion to fight drained from their eyes. Weapons slipped from suddenly nerveless fingers. The certainty that had driven them to break the pacto, to invade neutral ground, to risk everything for victory, it simply vanished. Not destroyed, severed. They were still angels, still divine beings of terrible beauty and purpose. But the connection to that purpose, the thread that linked them to heaven's will and heaven's war, cut. Angels caught in the light's radius stopped fighting, not frozen, released. Their war forms softened back into more human shapes. Some fell to their knees. Others simply stood, stunned, as if waking from a dream that had lasted centuries. And Michael stood at the center, wings spread, coat fitting him like it had been made for his current form rather than the archangel he'd been a millennium ago. His face was peaceful. More peaceful than I'd ever seen it, even in our quietest moments, even when he'd seemed closest to Walter's tired, gentle patience. But his eyes held everything. 1,000 years of loneliness compressed into a single gaze. "I'm sorry," he said, and his voice carried something I'd never heard from him before. Finality. The sound of a door closing for the last time. "I'm so sorry I couldn't find a better way. I'm sorry that this is what it takes. I'm sorry that guardianship means sacrifice, and sacrifice means loss, and loss means becoming something that exists in the spaces between existence." The leader approached slowly, weapon gone, dissolved in the white light. The angel's face showed something that might have been tears if angels could cry. Cracks of radiance where moisture should have been, light bleeding from eyes that had witnessed the dawn of creation. "Michael, you don't have to. We didn't understand if we'd known." "You couldn't have known. No one can know until they make the choice. That's why I've guarded it. Why I've spent 40 years in this chamber, living half a life, existing in the margins." He looked around at all the angels who'd come to attack, at the few guardians who'd survived the defense at the chamber that had been a sanctuary and was now a battlefield scarred with the evidence of broken peace. "Go home. Tell them Michael still guards the bank. Tell them the code is no longer an option. Tell them to find another way to end their war, because this way, this path, it only leads to more exile. What will happen to you?" Michael glanced at me, and I saw Walter in his eyes one last time. The old man who'd warned me about headaches and shared his bread, and taught me that even the most terrible knowledge could be carried with kindness. "I'll do what I've always done. I'll guard. I'll wait. I'll exist in the spaces between existence, in the margins of creation, in the pause between heartbeats." He touched the coat, and it began to glow brighter, the leather seeming to merge with his skin. And maybe eventually I'll understand why this was necessary, why some prices have to be paid, why some choices can't be unmade. The light intensified. Michael's form began to blur, edges becoming indistinct. The coat was consuming him, or he was becoming it, or both. The separation from all three realms wasn't metaphorical. It was literal. Physical, metaphysical. He was being removed from the fundamental architecture of reality, excised like a tumor, cut away to preserve the whole. "Travis," he said, his voice already fading, becoming hollow, an echo of an echo. "The bank needs a keeper, someone who understands what it costs to maintain neutrality, someone who's seen what happens when the pacto breaks, someone who knows that the hardest choice is often refusing to choose a side." I can't, Walter, I'm not ready for this. You already are." His smile was barely visible now, just a suggestion of expression in the dissolving light. "You were never just my assistant. You were my replacement. I've been training you since the day you arrived, teaching you not just the protocols but the philosophy, the weight, the cost. I thought you were just being kind. I was. Kindness and purpose aren't mutually exclusive, Travis. Remember that. Remember that even in exile, even in isolation, even when you're guarding something that could destroy everything, you can still choose to be kind. You can still share your lunch with someone who forgot theirs. You can still warn them about headaches and bad coffee, and the dreams that come from staring too long at portals. My vision blurred with tears. I didn't remember starting to cry. Walter, Michael, please, tell them I did this willingly. The light swallowed him completely now, his form nothing but a silhouette of white radiance. Tell them I chose this. Make sure they know it was a choice, not a punishment. Not a sacrifice forced upon me. A choice made freely with full knowledge of the cost, because some things are worth the price. His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried across the entire chamber. And Travis, keep asking questions, keep doubting, keep struggling with faith and knowledge and the weight of what you've seen. That's what makes you better than us. You question meaning. We just obey it. You create purpose. We just fulfill it. Don't ever lose that. Don't ever let this place make you certain. The light flared one final time, so bright I had to close my eyes. So intense I felt it through my eyelids, burning itself into my retinas in patterns that would haunt my dreams for months. When I opened them, Michael was gone. The coat lay on the floor, empty. Just brown leather again, looking old and worn, and utterly mundane. No glow, no power, no trace of the being who just vanished into whatever space existed beyond heaven and hell and earth. The attacking angels stood in silence, staring at the space where their brother had been. Some were weeping openly now, light streaming from their eyes. Others had collapsed, unable to process what they'd witnessed. Their leader knelt slowly, head bowed, wings folded in a posture of absolute grief. He sacrificed himself twice, they whispered, voice breaking. Once to save us from each other, once to save us from ourselves. And both times, we were too blind to see what we were asking him to give up. I didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know what you say when you watch someone erase themselves from existence to protect beings who'd come here to kill him. To steal from him, to take the very thing he'd spent a millennium guarding. What words exist for that kind of sacrifice? The angels left. One by one, they retreated through the golden portal, heads bowed, weapons abandoned on the chamber floor where they'd fallen. Blades of starlight that would fade within hours, returning to whatever forge had created them. The last one, the leader, paused at the threshold. Human, they said, and the word carried none of the condescension I'd heard from angels before. Just respect, maybe even envy. What was he like? In his exile? Was there any joy for him? Any peace? I thought about Walter. The tired old man with the walking stick who moved like his left leg pained him constantly. The friend who'd taught me which artifacts were most dangerous, who'd shared his lunch when I forgot mine, who'd warned me about the portals and the price of knowledge and the dreams that followed when you let the bank's strangeness sink too deep. Who'd laughed, actually laughed, a rough barking sound that seemed to surprise him, when I'd tripped over my own cassock during my first week and sprawled across the floor in an undignified heap. Who'd looked at me with genuine concern when I'd shown up one morning with dark circles under my eyes, having spent the night wrestling with theological doubts that seminary had never prepared me for. Who'd existed for 40 years in exile, in isolation, in the spaces between, and had still chosen to be kind. He was kind, I said finally, my voice thick. Despite everything, despite exile and loss and 1,000 years of loneliness, he was still kind. He still cared. He still found ways to be present for someone else even when his own existence was half-lived. The angel nodded slowly, understanding blooming across its perfect features. That was always Michael's gift, not his strength or his skill or his righteousness. The angel's wings spread, preparing for departure. His capacity for kindness even when kindness served no strategic purpose, even when it cost him, especially when it cost him. They vanished through the portal, and it sealed behind them with a sound like a door closing in an empty cathedral. That peculiar echo that speaks of vast spaces and absence and the weight of silence. The chamber fell quiet, completely quiet. For the first time in 3 months, I couldn't hear the hum of the portals, couldn't feel the ambient energy that usually filled the bank. It was as if Michael's sacrifice had drained something essential from the place, leaving it hollow. The guardians who'd survived retreated to their positions, reforming the perimeter around the vault. But they moved differently now, slower, heavier, like they'd aged centuries in the span of minutes. The bound demons dissolved back into shadows that clung to the walls. The bound angels became geometric patterns of light again, barely visible, their earlier solidity gone. They'd lost companions today, beings they'd served with for millennia. And they'd watched their greatest defender erase himself from existence to save beings who'd come to destroy. I stood alone in the center, surrounded by the scars of battle. Gouges in the floor that went down several feet carved by celestial weapons. Burn marks on the walls where guardian essence had splattered and scorched stone that had stood for millennia. The destroyed desk, nothing but splinters and ash. The ledger, its pages scattered like snow across the chamber, most of them burned or torn beyond recognition. And on the floor, the coat, and next to it Walter's walking stick. I picked up the stick carefully, reverently. It was warm, humming with residual energy that made my palm tingle. Cracks ran through its length, glowing faintly silver from within like veins of precious metal in dark stone. The wood, if it had ever been wood, felt alive under my fingers. It felt heavier than it should. Not physically, metaphorically, spiritually. Like it carried the weight of every choice Michael had made, every sacrifice, every lonely year of exile compressed into the grain. I carried it to the vault with the same careful attention I'd give to a holy relic, because that's what it was. The walking stick of an archangel who'd given up everything twice. Who'd stood guard for 40 years using a disguise so perfect even I, who'd worked beside him for months, hadn't suspected. I placed it inside the vault, next to where the coat had hung. The silver glow from the cracks illuminated the small space, casting strange shadows that looked almost like wings. Then I picked up the coat. It was just leather in my hands. Cool to the touch. Supple, well-worn, shaped by use. No divine power coursed through it. No cursed energy made my skin crawl. Whatever made it special, whatever terrible gift it granted, that only activated when worn, and looking at it now, empty and harmless and somehow sad, I understood why Michael had guarded it so carefully. Not because it was powerful, because it represented the choice to give up everything. And some choices are too terrible to offer, even to those who think they're ready, even to those who believe they understand the cost, because you can't understand that cost until you've paid it, and by then it's too late to change your mind. I hung the coat back on its hook, positioned it the way Michael had kept it, the way it had hung for a millennium before he'd worn it again. My hands shook as I stepped back as I prepared to seal the vault. "I'll guard it," I whispered to the empty chamber, to the stick glowing in the darkness, to whatever remained of Michael in the spaces between. "I promise. No one else pays this price. Not while I'm here." The vault door closed with a sound of absolute finality, and the moment the seal engaged, the bank began to repair itself, not all at once. Gradually, almost gently, as if the chamber itself was recovering from trauma, healing like living tissue. Cracks in the floor sealed, stone flowing like water to fill the gouges, solidifying smooth and unmarked. Burn marks faded from the walls, the scorched stone lightening shade by shade until no evidence remained of guardian essence spilled in defense. The destroyed desk reassembled itself, splinters flying back together, joining seamlessly, until it stood whole and solid. A new ledger appeared on the desk's surface, materializing like morning dew. Its pages were blank and waiting, bound in leather that matched the coat, ready to document whatever came next. The portal stabilized. The golden gateway's flickering ceased, its edges becoming sharp and defined. The dark portal's roiling calmed to its usual purposeful movement. Even purgatory's gray emptiness seemed less oppressive, less heavy. The temperature normalized, the air cleared, the taste of lightning and ash faded, replaced by the familiar scent of incense and age. And through it all I felt something click back into place. Not physical, spiritual. The pacto reasserting itself, knitting back together like bone healing after a break. Stronger now somehow. Reinforced by Michael's final sacrifice, by the reminder of what neutrality costs, by the proof that some beings would give up everything to maintain the balance. I sat down at the desk, my legs suddenly unable to support my weight. My hands trembled as I opened the ledger to the first page. Words appeared immediately in silver script. Michael's handwriting, I realized. The same careful letters he'd used when teaching me how to document transactions, how to verify artifacts, how to maintain the records that kept the bank functioning. To whoever reads this, the Bank of Three Kingdoms exists to maintain neutrality in a war that has no righteous side. Both heaven and hell believe they fight for good. Both are wrong. Both are right. The truth exists in the space between their certainties. Guard it well. Guard it fairly. And remember, the greatest weapons are not the ones we use, but the ones we choose not to. Some choices are more powerful unmade. Some victories are achieved through restraint. Some wars are won by refusing to fight. The coat of Michael is sealed. It must remain sealed. Not because it doesn't work, it works perfectly. That's the problem. It grants exactly what you ask for and destroys everything you didn't know you needed. Guard it. Honor it. Remember what it cost. And be kind. Even here. Especially here. Kindness is the last defense against becoming what you guard against. Below that, a new entry began writing itself in golden ink, the letters forming slowly, deliberately, as if the ledger itself struggled to document what had just occurred. Transaction logged. Archangel Michael. Item, Coat of Michael. Status, returned and sealed. Authorization, self-sacrifice. Price paid, everything. Notes, the keeper has given himself to preserve the kept. The guardian has become what he guarded against, removed, separated, exiled beyond exile. This transaction cannot be undone. This choice cannot be unmade. Let it be remembered. Let it be honored. Let it never be repeated. I touched the words, feeling them pulse with warmth under my fingertips. The ink was still wet, still drying, still real. I'll guard it, I whispered to the empty chamber, to the ledger, to the vault that held a walking stick and a coat and the memory of sacrifice. I promise. I'll remember. I'll be kind. The ledger's pages turned themselves, revealing blank space ready for whatever came next. And in the silence that followed, I swear I heard a voice. Faint, distant, carried on a current of air that shouldn't exist in this sealed chamber. Thank you, kid. End of part 3. The end. The weeks that followed were strange in ways I hadn't anticipated. Father Dominic visited 3 days after the attack. He descended the 73 steps with the slow, careful movements of someone who knew what waited below, who'd made this journey countless times before me, before Walter, perhaps before anyone could remember. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, surveying the chamber, the repaired floor, the new desk, the ledger that had replaced the one burned to ash. His eyes lingered on the vault, and something in his expression suggested he knew exactly what had happened, had perhaps been waiting for it to happen for years. Travis, he said finally, his voice carrying the weight of centuries, though he couldn't have been more than 70. You're still here. Where else would I go? He smiled faintly. Most don't last a week after witnessing what you've witnessed. They leave, find other vocations, other cities, other lives where the weight of knowledge doesn't crush them every morning when they wake up. I made a promise. To whom? To Walter, to Michael, to whoever he was. I gestured at the chamber around us. To this place. To the idea that some things are worth guarding even when guarding them costs everything. Father Dominic approached the desk, ran his fingers across its surface. The wood was smooth, unmarked, showing no evidence of having been destroyed days ago. He trained you well, the old priest said. Better than he trained the others who came before you. Perhaps because he knew his time was ending. Perhaps because he saw something in you that reminded him of who he used to be. The others? There have been 7 human keepers in the bank's history. Most served for a few years before the weight broke them. One lasted 20 years. Father Dominic's eyes met mine. Walter, Michael, he served for 40. Longer than any keeper before him. Longer than anyone thought possible for a being so fundamentally separated from creation. Why did you choose me? I didn't. He did. The priest moved toward the vault, stood before it with his head bowed like a man at prayer. 3 months before he brought you here, he came to me, said he'd found someone who asked the right questions, who doubted in the right ways, who had enough faith to be dangerous but enough skepticism to be wise. I remembered that conversation in the chapel, Father Dominic pulling me aside, asking if I was certain about my vows, if I understood what serving the church really meant. I'd thought it was routine questioning, standard procedure before ordination. It had been an interview. What happens now? I asked. You guard, you maintain, you witness. Father Dominic turned to face me. And when your time comes, when the weight becomes too much or when you find someone who asks the right questions, you train them, you prepare them, you pass on what Michael taught you. That's it? That's the whole job? That's everything, Travis. Continuity, memory, the willingness to stand in the spaces between and refuse to let them collapse. He moved toward the stairs, paused at the threshold. Michael understood that. He spent 1,000 years learning it, and in the end, he chose to embody it so completely that he became the separation itself. After he left, I sat at the desk for hours, staring at the ledger, at the silver script that documented Michael's final transaction. Traffic resumed the next day. Angels and demons arrived for their transactions as if nothing had happened, as if the chamber hadn't been a battlefield, as if an archangel hadn't erased himself from existence to preserve the neutrality they now casually relied upon. But I noticed changes, subtle shifts in behavior that might have been my imagination or might have been real. The angels moved more carefully through the space, their footsteps lighter, their voices softer. When they approached the desk to make their requests, they met my eyes, something they'd rarely done before, as if I'd earned some measure of respect by surviving, by staying, by choosing to guard what Michael had died to protect. The demons were different too, less mocking, less casual in their cruelty. One of them, a being that wore a businessman's skin and smelled faintly of ashes, actually thanked me after I processed his retrieval request. The word came out awkwardly, like he wasn't used to saying it, like gratitude was a language he'd forgotten centuries ago. For what? I'd asked, confused. For maintaining this. He'd gestured at the chamber, for standing in the keeper's place after what happened. It would be easy to walk away, to let this place fall, to decide the cost is too high. Michael thought it was worth the cost. Michael always did have terrible judgment about what to sacrifice. But the demon's smile held no malice, just something that might have been grief if demons grieved. That's why we trusted him, why we still do. And the souls from purgatory, those gray, worn-down spirits seeking resolution, seeking movement toward either redemption or damnation, they seemed lighter somehow, more hopeful, as if knowing someone had chosen exile to protect others gave them faith that their own waiting might have purpose. I fell into the rhythm of the work more deeply than I had when Walter was alive. Documentation became meditation. Verification became prayer. The enforcement of the pacto became my entire purpose, the lens through which I understood my place in creation. But it was lonely. God, it was lonely. Those first weeks, I'd arrive from my shift expecting to see Walter sitting in his usual chair, walking stick-propped beside him, pale eyes watching the dark portal with that peculiar intensity. I'd turn to ask him a question about an artifact or a procedure, and the words would die in my throat when I remembered he was gone. The chair remained empty. The space he'd occupied felt hollow, like a tooth extraction that your tongue keeps probing, expecting to find something that's no longer there. I started talking to him anyway. Late at night, when the chamber was empty except for the guardians and the humming portals, I'd speak aloud. Tell him about the day's transactions. Ask his opinion on difficult situations. Share observations about the war, about the beings who passed through, about the weight of knowledge I now carried. Sometimes, I swear sometimes, I felt a response. Not words, nothing so clear, just a sense of presence. A feeling that someone was listening, that I wasn't completely alone in this work. It might have been my imagination. It might have been wishful thinking. Or it might have been Michael, existing in the spaces between, still watching over the bank he'd died to protect. I chose to believe the latter. It made the loneliness bearable. 3 months after the attack, I was processing a routine transaction, an angel retrieving a binding spell to contain a demon who'd violated territorial agreements, when they paused at the golden portal on their way out. "The Keeper," they said, voice neutral but not unkind. "He still guards?" It took me a moment to understand the question. They weren't asking about me. They were asking about Michael, about the archangel who'd vanished into white light and absence. I looked at the vault, at the walking stick I knew glowed faintly through the sealed door, at the coat that hung in eternal waiting. "Yes," I said, "he still guards." The angel's expression shifted. Relief, maybe, or vindication, or simply acknowledgement of something they'd hoped was true. "Good," they said quietly. "The war continues, but it continues differently now, with more care, more restraint, because we remember what it cost him to stop us, what it cost him to save us from ourselves." They left, and I could have sworn they bowed slightly as they passed through the portal. Not to me, to the chamber itself, to Michael's memory, to the sacrifice that had rewritten the rules of engagement. I understood then what Michael, what Walter, had really accomplished. He hadn't just saved the bank. He hadn't just prevented heaven from claiming the coat. He'd reminded both sides of something crucial, something they'd forgotten in millennia of war. That some things are more important than winning. That sacrifice has meaning beyond strategic advantage. That the space between the extremes, the neutral ground, the pause between breaths, the chamber beneath the Vatican where enemies met without fighting, that space was sacred. Worth dying for. Worth becoming something beyond death to preserve. The war continued, of course. It always had, always would, an eternal conflict between beings who existed to embody opposition. But it continued differently now, with more restraint, more awareness of cost. Because somewhere, in a space beyond heaven and hell and purgatory, an archangel who'd given up everything kept watch, making sure the weapons too terrible to use stayed that way, making sure the balance held, making sure that even in war, there was room for mercy. Or at least, I chose to believe that. 6 months in, I developed my own routines, my own ways of managing the weight. I kept Walter's schedule, arrived at the same times he had, took my breaks when he used to take his, sat in his chair sometimes, though it never felt right, like wearing clothes that didn't quite fit. I brought lunch every day, usually bread and cheese, sometimes fruit, once in a while something more substantial from the commissary. And I set aside half of it on the desk, the way Walter used to share his meals with me. The food would sit there for hours, untouched. Then I'd eat it at the end of my shift, cold and a bit stale, and pretend it was companionship. I read the archives in my spare time. Centuries of transaction records, documentation of artifacts retrieved and returned, notes on beings who'd passed through the bank over millennia. And occasionally, buried in the older records, I'd find entries in familiar handwriting. Silver script. Michael's observations, recorded during his 40 years of service. The demon Ashtoreth retrieved the chains of binding today. She looked tired. I wonder if they all feel it, this endless war, this perpetual conflict that serves no purpose beyond its own continuation. I wonder if they dream of resolution the way I dream of home. 17 angels came through yesterday, all requesting weapons, all preparing for some offensive I'm not privy to. I wanted to ask them if they remembered what we used to be, if they recalled the time before the war, before the fall, before everything became about winning and losing. But I didn't. Questions like that violate neutrality, and neutrality is all I have left. A soul came through from purgatory today. Young woman, died in a car accident, still confused about where she was, what had happened. I broke protocol. I know I shouldn't have, but I sat with her for an hour, talked about nothing important, just existed beside her while she processed her grief. She thanked me before she left. First time anyone's thanked me in 50 years. I'd forgotten how good it felt, how much I miss simple human connection. Reading those entries felt like conversations with a friend I'd lost, like Walter reaching across time to remind me I wasn't alone in this, that he'd felt the same weight, the same loneliness, the same questions about whether any of it mattered. It helped. The entries stopped about 3 months before I'd arrived, as if Michael had known his time was ending, as if he'd chosen to stop documenting his own existence because soon there'd be someone else to do the documenting, someone else to carry the weight. Me. A year after the attack, Father Dominic visited again. This time he brought someone with him, a young woman, maybe 25, with dark hair and uncertain eyes. She looked at the chamber with the same expression I remembered wearing my first day, awe mixed with terror, curiosity fighting with the urge to run. "Travis," Father Dominic said, "this is Rebecca Chen. She's expressed interest in theological studies, particularly in the nature of neutrality, the spaces between certainties, the weight of witnessing." I understood immediately. "She's not ready," I said. "Neither were you. Neither was Michael when he first wore the coat and learned what exile meant." The old priest gestured at the chamber. "But readiness isn't about preparation. It's about willingness. And Rebecca has asked questions I haven't heard since the day you stumbled into my office wondering if faith and doubt could coexist." Rebecca approached the desk carefully, eyes tracking the portals, the artifacts, the guardians standing their eternal watch. Her hands trembled slightly. "What is this place?" she whispered. "The space between," I said. "The pause, the breath, the place where enemies meet without fighting, and where the worst weapons stay locked away because someone chooses to guard them. And you guard it alone?" I looked at the vault, at the silver glow that sometimes leaked from its sealed edges, at the chair that still felt like Walter's even though I'd sat in it 1,000 times, at the ledger that documented a millennium of transactions and sacrifices. "No," I said quietly. "I'm never alone here. The guardians keep watch. The previous keepers leave their wisdom in the archives, and somewhere in the spaces between all realms, an archangel who sacrificed everything still stands guard." "Michael," she said. Not a question. She'd done her research. "Michael," I confirmed. "He taught me that even in exile, even in isolation, you can choose kindness. You can share your lunch with someone who forgot theirs. You can warn them about headaches from staring at portals. You can be present for others even when your own existence is half-lived." Rebecca's eyes glistened. "That's why you do this. Because he showed you it was possible. Because he showed me it mattered, that standing in the spaces between isn't passive. It's the most active choice you can make. Refusing to let the extremes collapse into each other. Maintaining the possibility of peace even when peace seems impossible." Father Dominic watched our exchange with something like approval. "I'll leave you two to talk," he said. "Rebecca has many questions. I suspect you have answers, or at least the right kind of ignorance to help her find her own." After he left, Rebecca and I talked for hours. I showed her the portals, explained the pacto, walked her through the basics of documentation and verification. I told her about Walter, about Michael, about the cost of guarding weapons too terrible to use. She didn't run. By the end of the shift, she asked if she could come back. "To learn," she said, "to understand, to maybe, if I prove capable, to help guard this place." I thought about Walter preparing me, training me without me realizing it, teaching me not just procedures but philosophy, not just rules but the weight behind them. "Yes," I said, "but understand something. This work changes you. It gives you knowledge you can't unknow. It shows you truths that make comfortable faith impossible. You'll question everything, doubt everything, wonder if any of it matters." "And does it?" she asked. "Matter?" I looked around the chamber, at the portals humming their eternal song, at the artifacts waiting on shelves, at the guardians maintaining their watch. at the vault holding a walking stick and a coat and the memory of sacrifice. Michael thought so, I said. And he gave up everything, twice, to prove it. That's enough for me. Rebecca nodded slowly. When can I start? Next shift. Bring lunch, and be prepared to share it. She smiled faintly and left, climbing the 73 steps back to the world above. I sat alone in the chamber, feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. Not that the war would end. Not that heaven and hell would make peace. Not that Michael would somehow return from whatever space he existed in now. But hope that the work would continue. That the bank would persist. That someone else would learn to stand in the spaces between and refuse to let them collapse. That the sacrifice wouldn't be forgotten. I opened the ledger to record the day's transactions, and new words appeared in silver script beneath the standard entries. Well done, Keeper. Well done. I touched the words, felt them warm under my fingers, and allowed myself to believe they came from somewhere beyond my imagination. Thank you, Walter, I whispered to the empty chamber. For everything. The air stirred, carrying a scent like ozone and distant thunder and the faint echo of wings. And somewhere in the vault, the walking stick glowed a little brighter. The portals hum. The vault holds its secrets. The guardians maintain their watch. And I, Travis Holloway, former seminarist, current keeper of the Bank of Three Kingdoms, I guard, I maintain. I witness. I remember the old man with the walking stick who taught me that even fallen angels can still choose to fly, even if the only sky they'll ever see again is the ceiling of a chamber beneath the holiest ground on earth. I remember his kindness, his patience, his willingness to sacrifice everything so others wouldn't have to. And I try every single day to honor that memory by being present for the work, by maintaining neutrality, by standing in the spaces between with the same quiet determination he showed for 40 years. Some sacrifices echo forever. Michael's does. I make sure of it. That's my job now. Guardian of the Bank of Three Kingdoms. Keeper of the neutrality. Student of an archangel who gave up heaven twice and never once regretted it. And maybe, just maybe, teacher to someone who will carry this work forward when my time comes. The war continues. But it continues around the bank, not through it. And that space, that pause, that breath, that moment of neutrality, exists because someone chose to guard it. Because Michael chose to become it. Because I choose to honor that choice every time I descend the 73 steps and open the chamber door. The ledger waits. The artifacts hum with dormant power. The portals connect realms that should never meet. And somewhere in the silver light bleeding from the vault's sealed edges, I can still hear him. Keep questioning, Travis, keep doubting. Keep struggling with faith and knowledge and the weight of what you've seen. That's what makes you better than all of us. I will, Walter, I promise, for as long as I can bear the weight, for as long as the bank needs a keeper. For as long as the spaces between need someone to stand in them and refuse to let them collapse. Some promises are worth keeping. Some sacrifices are worth honoring. Some exiles are worth remembering. This is mine. This is enough. This is everything.